Your stance on Gregg Berhalter is probably more on the fact that it could have been anybody, and you were very much not a 2-cycle coach person, right? Generally. Plus maybe Gregg Berhalter not being your right guy. But I do want to share a few stats with you. And I think we'll share these as graphics in the future for people to understand, because I think it's worth a debate, right? We are caught in this world of what's next. We don't have a coach. We don't have a GM. We don't have a sporting director. But I'm going to give you a few of these things, and we don't need to discuss this in detail because I think we'll have time.
You can't throw these out.
Okay,
we can't discuss them.
How about I'll leave most of the details because we'll create some graphics in the future where producer Des or producer Alice can throw them up on the screen, and we can make an entire episode out of it, right? Because if you were a player, Jimmy, and they were talking about, it was somebody that was telling me about Kevin De Bruyne when he went to do his new deal at Manchester City. They came in, his agent came in, not just with like a, hey, what's he worth? He came in with statistics that said, sure, you want to keep him. But guess what? He is number one in all of these categories globally, domestically, all these things. He is at the top of the charts. And that was a negotiation tool, right? To actually use hard data that says it's going to cost you some money to keep this guy, right? Sure. Like you got it. It's not just because you like him or because your team wins championships. He's also the best. And the data doesn't lie. The data on Gregg Berhalter puts him first in most categories. Now, we'll talk about
all-time U.S. managers.
All-time U.S. managers,
okay.
Including, and some of them, which we'll get to, are more on like youngest team in the World Cups, 5 points in World Cup group stages, which is tied for the most. There's 10 of the 11 youngest lineups in World Cup qualifying worldwide. Obviously, he doesn't necessarily control that, but kind of does. Wins in the calendar year, fastest coach to 30 wins, 72% highest. 72% was the highest win percentage of any U.S. national team coach. And then it goes down to some deeper details. And so I think it would be good, and probably needs its due course, to sort of establish what we have and then talk about where we're going to get better with the next coach, right? Because we talk a lot about the tactics. We talk about freedom. You mentioned Jim Curtin's, like we need to have less rigidity, which we've talked about Jose Mourinho, who's going to be very rigid. And all of those pieces, I think it's worth the conversation. And again, probably not for today, but how do we move forward, right? How do you take the data and say, we're going to look past this data, or we believe this is all just incremental growth for the players, for the coach, and all these things, that the next coach is going to be number one on all these categories? Because it was like, shots against,
give us the goddamn stats, Heath. You're holding out on us.
Out round.
Yeah, such a buildup.
It's a lot of things.
Okay, let's go. Let's break it down one by one. Go ahead.
I mean, it's going to take an hour if we do that, but
okay, all right.
First team to get 2 shutouts in a World Cup group stage. 16.3 recoveries in opponents' half per game, ranked 4th of 160 of the last 5 World Cups. In 2010, U.S. had 4.3 per game, ranked 158 out of 160. In 2014, the U.S. had 5 per game, ranked 155th out of 60. 4.8 open play shots per game conceded, ranked 9th out of 160. This is again 160 of the last.
So just so I can conceptualize this, all these stats are proving is that we defended higher up the field.
Yeah, I mean the game has changed too. The game is
I get that. I'm just trying to make sure that we can kind of we can
defended
visualize
higher up the field for sure.
Higher up the field, and we took those risks, which ended up leading to some good stats. Which I think, okay, so let's take that and say, okay, a new coach that can come in will be like, well, thank you for these stats. I have a team that's good at doing X, and probably can continue that, or even continue to fine tune that to make it even more effective. Because it's, how do you turn those? We only scored 1 goal in the group stages.
Okay, right? move away from style of play.
That wasn't an own goal. I'm just saying. Listen,
winning percentage. Highest winning percentage of anyone over 10 games in the U.S. national team for the last 5 World Cup cycles.
That's awesome.
Highest winning percentage in official competitions, above Bruce Arena, Bob Bradley, Jurgen Klinsmann, Bora, Steve Sampson, and Bob Gansler. Highest home winning percentage, obviously, doesn't have that for matches on the road. Highest games unbeaten percentage of any national team coach. Shutout rate by game, he's at the highest of any national team coach. Knockout round winning percentage, he's higher than any national team coach. Win percentage when scoring first, that's a random one. Need more context on that. Goals per game by manager, he's the highest of any national team coach. Goals against by game, he is by far the highest of any national team manager. So there are some details. Now, I think we should spend some time in one of these episodes. We'll get graphics made and we'll put these up on the wall and we'll beat them to death to say, yeah, like you said, pressing higher up the field, that's a new style of play, right? That is a newer, trendier style of play. And that's also the principles and the tactics of which he deployed. So that's going to be higher than a team that's going to sit back because you're not going to win the ball that much in those situations. But I would love for us to look at that and put it into context of the next manager, because we both agree that Gregg's not going to get this next job. Do they need to win those categories? Is there a manager that's going to be better in those categories? Or what are the categories we want them to win that's going to prove that this team is, Jim Curtin's comments versus where we are now type of thing?
For me, my initial thing is transition. If we are winning the ball higher up the field, how do we turn those into goals? Because as I was mentioning before, and those are impressive stats. You can't take those away from Gregg Berhalter. He'll always have that. Yeah. And in some ways, I feel like he should. I don't know if it's going to get any better. I think it gets harder from here in some capacity because the expectations are higher, especially because we're hosting the World Cup. But again, him or someone else, we have to turn that type of possession and those turnovers high up the field into real goals. Right. Only scoring one goal in the group stages, that wasn't an own goal, right? Is that correct? We scored against Wales, and we scored against Iran, and the Pulisic. And how do we score against Wales? Oh, Tim away. So we scored 2 goals in the group stages. Mm-hmm. And so I just feel like with those numbers, which are impressive, it's the transition play. And can we turn? And this is not isolated to Gregg Berhalter. Whether we're coaching at the youngest levels, like how you turn opportunities into dangerous chances, bringing attacks to conclusion, as the great Heath Pearce likes to say. How do you get something positive from these things? It continues to put pressure on teams. Is very difficult. And a lot of teams around the world struggle with this. Because ultimately, if you're a team that has a lot of possession, let's say when we play against El Salvador and they sit in a low block, breaking down a low block is not easy, especially if a team is committed to putting 10 players in that low block. So how do we do that? That's going to be the next step, I think, for a rigid coach or one that's a little bit more Jim Curtin-esque based on his comments of letting them be themselves and play. So it's I think it's tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah. I guess my final point on that is that we've established that we are at the end of this period, right? Claudio era, the drama, Gregg Berhalter not going to survive this, whether it was because they didn't want him or because this makes it so they can't have him. And now we need to stop reflecting and start sort of progressing or looking forward, right? In terms of like, even our focus, we need to start to now, like maybe this was a part that was holding up the coaching search or holding up some of those things or whatever it is. It's safe to say that we've now got to look ahead and say, where are we going from here?
Well, I think we're both on the same page that we need, we're going to get a new coach. We need a new coach, but we have to walk before we can run. And that means putting the sporting director in place, putting a general manager in place who are going to ultimately make that decision because that's what they're accountable for. They're the ones that are accountable for hiring and firing coaches.